Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother asarimhotep, and this is the Mbongi, brought to you by the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology. And today is Ujima, which is Tuesday, August the 9th, 2022. And today's conversation, it is going to be a workshop. So you might have a need for some pen and paper if you like to take notes, and is titled To Reconstruct or Not Reconstruct Egyptian or Ancient Egyptian Before Comparing, a response to a hypothesis made by Dr. Obadeli Cambone. So all of that and more when we return in just a second. And we are back. So, peace and blessings, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for joining, especially those of you who are live with us. And then, of course, those of you who are catching the archives. And so, as always, I like to acknowledge a few of the people who have made themselves known in the YouTube chat. And so I'd like to say peace and blessings to Lamar Pope. Thank you for joining us. Emmanuel Adama is in the building. Sister Sherry Jones is in the building. I appreciate you. And as always, love and light to Sister Tamika One, who is in the building. Our good brother Any Herrick Calfani is in the building. And I saw someone else earlier, and it doesn't look like it's showing up here. But want to recognize that I saw Sunjata earlier. So peace out to Sunjata and Lungani, if I'm saying that correctly. If I'm not, I do apologize, but peace and blessings and welcome to the Mbongi. And if y'all haven't been, kind of paying attention, I'm trying to, popularize using the 7 principles of Kwanzaa and identifying them with each day of the week. So if you kind of look on the the description of the video, you'll see the days of the week. So you have Umoja, which is Sunday, Kujichagulia, which is Monday, Ujima, which is Tuesday, and then you have Ujamaa, which is Wednesday, Nia Thursday, Kuumba Friday, and Imani Saturday. So I think I will do an entire show on why I believe this should be a living practice for most of us. So you'll see when I'm doing the shows that, at the beginning, it'll say the Kwanzaa principle, which will be identifiable whatever day of the week it is. So we'll be referring to dates and times, in African languages. So just keep that in mind. And see, we got a few more people that have made themselves known in the chat. So we got S369 is in the building. Thank you for joining. We have Michael Eason in the building, and we have our good brother Dejed and Ankh Hekara is in the building. And he says, peace and blessings to everyone in the Meta-Netra language. And I think that is it on that end. And so we are streaming not only on YouTube, but also on Facebook on both the Harold Johnson page and the asarimhotep page. So I'm not streaming on Twitter as of yet, or as of today. So, and please, he says Loic Nkiel, if I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but thank you for joining. He says a connection issue. Is it hard to hear me? Let me know if y'all are having connection issues, or is it just this individual here? And we have Mr. Trade Day 90 in the building. He says, yo, please do a quick rundown of why Kemet means Bantu for a hating naysayer in the audience from Twitter Space. Please. I'm not sure exactly what you mean. I've never made the argument that the word Kemet means Bantu. You'll have to hit me to the argument that is being had, and then I'll be able to respond appropriately. All right. And everyone's saying that I'm loud and clear. And someone says, what was Kevin Samuels' real name? I believe Kevin Samuels is his name. I'm not sure what the link is to that. And it says, Michael Easton says, I think Jean-Claude and Bowley took Cambone to school. Yeah, I've heard about their exchange, and it's very interesting nonetheless. So we'll get a little bit on that today. All righty. So everyone is saying that I'm coming in loud and clear. So I do appreciate the update from each and every one of you. And so we're going to kind of get into this. But before we go into the study, I'm going to need each and every one of you to That is right. Make sure that you hit the like button. And if you are new to the program, please subscribe and make sure that you hit the bell so that you know when we're doing videos such as this, or we're doing any kind of interviews or anything else to that nature. And so while, oh, I see. So he says, he meant the word remech. So the word remech in Bantu, that is a lesson unto itself. But there's a whole video. So what you could do is show them the video and my proofs in the video. So you just go to the my page and go through the videos, and you'll see the remech means Bantu breakdown. He says sometimes the connection freezes for 2 or 3 seconds. Otherwise, sound and video is okay. I'm in Paris, by the way. I see. Well, thank you for joining all the way in Paris, and hopefully the connection issues won't be too bad, and you can get the gist of the conversation. Or you may have to just kind of come back to the archive once it is said and done. So let's get into this. I'm going to share my screen, and boom. So I'm going to do that. And again, I won't be able to see the comment section while I am putting on the conversation. So please forgive me there. And we are going to get started. So as discussed earlier, we're dealing with the question of whether it's a methodological question that has come up several times, and it's come up more recently again in a private discussion between Dr. Isa and I. And so, for those of you who are subscribed to the channel or on my social media pages, you know that today we were to interview Professor Okwamiose, Salam Faraji, and uh, Salam Faraji and Dr. Jahi Isa. But there was a kind of a communication error and schedule conflict with Dr. Ose. So we're going to postpone that interview. And so hopefully either by the end of this week or sometime next week, we will have that interview. But the reason why we have that interview set up is because they have put together a response to Dr. Obadeli Cambone, who wrote an editorial critique on their book, The Origin of the Word Amen, that originally came out I think around 2000 or 2001, but the second edition or revised edition came out in 2020. So, to my understanding, Dr. Faraji and Dr. Isa gave a copy of the book to Dr. Cambone to get some feedback directly from him. And, he did not provide the immediate feedback, but instead decided to write the editorial critique and published it in the journal for which he is the editor in chief, the Ghanaian Journal of Linguistics. So that was written in 2020, but Dr. Faraji and Dr. Isa did not respond on paper until this year. And the article came out a couple of weeks ago. And so I did a show critiquing the critique that was made by Dr. Cambone. And then, and so we were going to have them to, articulate their side of the story and the conflict and the meaning behind the book and its methods. And so we're going to have to reschedule that today. But in response to my critique, Dr. Isa, because he doesn't study linguistics, there were some parts he was confused on concerning the argument that was being made in relationship to Dr. Theophilo Binga's suggestion, because Cambone suggested that the authors of The Origin of the Word Amen, review Dr. Theophilo Binga's 1993 book on the common origin of Pharaonic Egyptian, Coptic, and modern African languages, a book on historical or an introduction to historical linguistics in French, however. So in that text, he does not do a linguistic analysis of the word Amen, in which Cambone wrongly articulated that he did, at least not in the proper way in which would be acceptable by linguists in the field. And so, in that conversation, that's when Dr. Isa repeated an argument that Cambone is the origin of, and that he often makes. So, with that, I wanted to do this show, for those of you, who may have heard this argument. I've addressed this before, and I've also addressed it I've addressed it before online, but I've also addressed it in Umoja Volume 2, which came out also in 2020. So now we're going to get into the meat of this discussion. So, as mentioned, Dr. Obadeli Cambone, who is a PhD in linguistics, he's also a research fellow in the Language, Literature, and Drama section of the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana. He is currently the editor-in-chief of the Ghana Journal of Linguistics, which I mentioned earlier, and secretary of the African Studies Association of Africa. So, he and I have some history that many of you may know of. So, his name comes up a lot in opposition to many of the arguments that I make concerning Africa and the like. So that's nothing new. And in that tradition, there's people on the internet who, when I destroy their arguments and they have nowhere to run, they all cluster together and form uh, teams of degenerates, I call them. And so one of these groups is Team Osiris. So, of course, we got a long history of going back on information. And of course, they can't get past my information. They can't get past the scholarship. So they try any and everything to try to demean my name and the like, but that's another story. But some years ago, when we was going through another debate, and of course, because they can never defeat my arguments, they try to pull straws everywhere. So they consulted Dr. Cambone on a point, and this is what you see on the screen here is the reply. So this is public information. It's Team Osiris who posted this. So this is a screenshot of their presentation, I believe from 2016. And so, they shared with the public what Cambone said to them. So I know it's kind of small, so you can't see. So I typed it out for everyone. And this is what happened. So they asked him about a point or something. I forgot what the initial question was, but again, this is his response. So he says, "I've given a chance to read through Mboli's model, and it's fundamentally linguistically flawed in that it's ostensibly promoting the comparative method to reconstruct Negro Egyptian, but is using Meta Nature, which has not been reconstructed via the comparative method as a daughter language to do so. Thus, the capital A, I, Y, A, W, B, F, M, N, etc., are used uncritically as though they have been reconstructed via the comparative method when they haven't, because neither Imhotep, that is me, Asarimhotep, nor Mboli are quote unquote actual linguists. This fundamental methodological flaw has eluded both of them. They are only effective in a degree to which they can fool people into thinking that they are linguists." And which again, Cambone has a history of reading things but not reading things, because Mboli in his 2010 text has a whole section on why the transliteration system is not the phonemes of the language. So I don't know, if he was telling the truth that he read it or he skimmed through the book. But it was clear that he did not read the book. But that's neither here nor there. So, you know, uh, so this is what he means. So what does he mean by the comments that he made? So when you speak English, you spell words a certain way, but the sounds may be different, right? So when you hear the word herd, it looks like the word beard, but sounds like the word bird, right? So you can see the word herd and the word beard are spelled similarly, save the first consonants, but they're pronounced totally different. Same thing with the word dead. It looks like the word bead, but sounds like the word bed, right? So you see where this is going. So the way that we transcribe the language isn't reflective of actually how the words are pronounced. So we don't have a grapheme to represent in the language every sound that is a part of English. And the assumption is that that is the case. Well, we know that's a fact because the ancient Egyptians did not write out their vowels, so we definitely don't have any graphemes for the vowels in the ancient Egyptian language. And when it comes to the consonants may have variation, even though they're represented by one grapheme, for example. And so, here's a standard phonemic chart, created by the IPA, which has a lot more representations. But, you can find many of these on the internet. This is here for you to pause for, when you're reviewing this video, but, look at the IPA representations of the sound that we use in English, but do not have necessarily graphemes for. So, like when we say the word June, that J sound is different than, you know, uh, other words which we may use with the G sound. It may be pronounced the same, but we see that we have J in one instance and then G in another. The same grapheme, but you see how in this instance, G is not Joe, it is go, right? So although G can be pronounced two ways, just like C can be pronounced two ways, uh, we don't necessarily have a one-to-one correspondence between the sounds in the language and its graphical representations. So there's more than 27 sounds in the English language, right? So, all linguists know this fact. All Egyptologists know this. Everyone who has dealt with the language knows this. So when Cambone mentions this to individuals like myself or Ebola, he's not schooling anyone. Again, he claims he's read the text, but he must have skipped over the section on uh, Mboli addressing this and how he's moved forward in the text uh, with that knowledge and information. So, but the IPA, or International Phonetic Association, put together a particular chart to try to represent all sounds, but this is more so an idealistic thing, right? And so, what I have on the screen, I'm just going to read for you so to help you kind of understand the issues and the limitations with the IPA chart, right? And so this is coming from a text which we'll source in the next slide. It says some scholars find the phonetic theory on which the alphabet is based to be flawed or at least oversimplistic. For example, the association, that's the IPA association, defines the P as a voiceless bilabial plosive with no attention being paid to what the tongue might be doing during the articulation of that plosive, to the precise detail of what the vocal folds are doing or when they do it, to the lip position during that plosive, to the fact that the plosive may be lacking a shuttering phase or an opening phase, and so on. The vowel charts that are used by the association do not appear to correlate closely with either an articulatory description of what happens in the production of a vowel or the description of the acoustic structure of the sound wave produced during the articulation of the vowel. Phonological theory has also advanced so much that the talk of phonemes and allophones is in itself suspect. Despite these shortcomings, the alphabet has had, I'm talking about the IPA alphabet, has had and continues to have a huge practical value, provided that it is recalled that the alphabet was first created as a way of producing writing systems rather than, say, a way of producing full phonetic descriptions of articulation. So the IPA wasn't even created for how it's thought to be used now, right? And so she continues, gaps in the description can be filled in on the basis of an initial analysis in terms of the IPA categories. And so it's important to understand that while we have the IPA charts, it is not representative of the exact sounds in which it's supposed to represent. And so, those of us who study phonology and things are very well aware of this. And so what the way that Cambone treats the IPA is that these are absolute values. And if you don't use them, then you are somehow uh, faulty in your methodology. And that is just not the case. Again, because, and I'm going to stress this all throughout this conversation, that linguistics is mathematics. It is not a science. There's only one aspect of linguistics that is science, and that is phonology. And it falls under physics and the study of acoustics, right? And only in relatively recent times, as a result of technology, were we able to put phonology really in the class of science, because you had objective instruments from which to test certain phonological theories. But we'll get more into that a little later. And so you have the one problem with the IPA, that it doesn't accurately represent each sound. But then you have to keep in mind that human beings do not speak a language. We speak what we linguists call an idiolect. So the previous slide came from this very book here, the Linguistic Student's Handbook. I give it to all my students for an introductory to linguistics course, right? So on page 5, Dr. Bauer states, many linguists prefer to use the term idiolect for the language of an individual. So you don't speak English, you speak your idiolect. That seems simple enough until we ask what English consists of. Presumably, it consists of the sum of all the idiolects of people who we agree are speaking English. But some of these people have conflicting ideas about what is part of their language. In other words, when we speak of language, we're talking about the collective sum of the idiolects, the individual speaking ways of a group of people. And it is important to understand the nature of what an idiolect is, because every person has their unique way of pronouncing and saying and speaking a quote unquote language. And if we was to examine the full range of the way that a person thinks and speaks, you will see that it will differ from, uh, you know, uh, one individual to the next. And so this becomes very important, because when we speak of the language, we're speaking of an idealized representation, a model. So when you buy a book about the English language or Spanish or Turkish, whatever the language is, Hindi language, I don't know, any language uh, text that you get or learn, if you have some kind of language learning software, what is given to you is a model of the language. It is not an accurate representation of how every single person speaks in the language. And this is very important, because you can never scientifically describe how every person speaks in a language. That costs too much money, that takes too much time, and then of course new people are being born every day. So every year you would have to keep doing the same experiments over and over again, and that can get real costly. So what we do in science, just like we do in other, uh, uh, what we do in this case, like we do in other areas of science, is that you take a representative sample in its diversity, and then you create an average model for that particular group. And that's what you get in terms of the books and software and things of that nature. And why is this going to be important? So now we go to the next text. It's Linguistic Anthropology by Nancy Perot Hickerson. So she's having a conversation about phonology in this section of the text. And so she's going through the voiceless series in English, which is PT and K, right? The voiceless plosives, right? So she says in these examples, the variation between p and p, t and t, k and k is automatic. And what you're seeing here is these aspirations. So when you see this version here with the raised H, this is an aspirated P. And then this symbol here is representing a non-aspirated consonant, this equal sign that has been raised, right? So P, T, K can be aspirated or unaspirated. In English, the choice between aspirated and unaspirated release is conditioned by the phonological environment. In this case, the conditioning factor is the position of the consonant in the word, either word initial or second position preceded by S. Because the variation is automatic, native speakers of English are not normally aware of the choices, or indeed that there is any variation in the sounds at all. The other type of variation, free variation, may also be observed in these same words, as they might be pronounced by different speakers at different times. All of them have voiceless stops in word final position. Some individuals, when reading a list of 3 words, spot, stop, Scott, will strongly release or aspirate all of the final consonants, while some will not. Thus, spot could end either with a final t or a t. Again, the variation would not be noticed unless called to one's attention. However, it is not automatic and therefore not predictable, though probably related to rate and style of speaking. And so, again, we have another text here telling you that people are going to pronounce the words differently. And it's not attributed to simply dialect, right? It's within the same dialectical grouping that you may, in this particular case, the same word, some people will pronounce it um, unaspirated and others will pronounce it aspirated. But there's no way that we would only know that in a modern context, especially since we got, recording instruments that will allow us to really kind of hear that carefully. You're not going to be able to do such an analysis on a dead language for which there are no living representatives for that can speak it. So now, we have another text here. This is The Sounds of the World's Languages by Peter Laidfogged, or Laidfogged, I don't know how to pronounce that, and Ian Madison, right? So in this text, it says, in general, if a language has only a dental or an alveolar stop, then that stop will be laminal. If it is dental and apical, some people say apical, if it is an alveolar. But generalizations such as these should be treated with reserve. And I have this bolded for a reason. Most textbooks, for example, describe French TD in an L, we know it has I here, it's supposed to be an L, as laminal dental, and English TD and L as apical alveolar. But Dart has shown that 20 to 30% of her sample of 20 speakers of French use alveolar gestures for some of these sounds, the percentage differing for the different members of the set, and similar percentages of Californian English speakers use dental articulations. So this is something that you're going to have to come back and read again. But let me explain what's going on here. So we have the same four sounds in English and French. And in most textbooks, remember what I told you about what you're going to read in textbooks provide you with an idealized model for the language. It's never going to be 100% accurate of how all the people speak in a given territory or the like. So the for the French sounds T, D, N, and L, they're described in the textbooks as laminal-dental. But the same four sounds in English textbooks are described as an apical alveolar. So we pronounce them slightly differently on average, the same four sounds. But Dart's analysis shows that 20 to 30% of the French speakers speak in the way that the English speakers speak those same sounds, and a similar percentage for people in California who speak English are pronouncing those same four sounds in the same way that the French would speak it. So these, although they're the same sounds and they're articulated on average a particular way in these two languages, there's a large percent of the population who pronounce it like folks would in another language. And I guess there's more detail when you read the book and why that may be the case. But this goes to show that no matter what, you're never going to accurately represent every speaking population, and that no matter if you use IPA symbols or not, is not going to be representative of the way that the people speak. It's a model, it's an average, right? And so to kind of recap the arguments made by Cambone in regards to Mboli's work, Cambone is arguing that you cannot compare a transliteration of a dead language with phonemes from a living language, which is false as hell. And he doesn't apply that same logic to Theophilo Benga, who he likes to throw in people's face at every chance he gets. So this is something that even Benga doesn't do. Neither did Diop. And that you must reconstruct internally Egyptian, for example, and or the parent language first, and compare the graphemes from Egyptian to the quote unquote reconstruction of the parent proto language, which itself violates other standard practices, which I discussed in Umoja Volume 2, because he doesn't know how science works, and it's clear. And so thus the question for today, in terms of, do we reconstruct first the ancient Egyptian language before we can, compare any Egyptian words to, modern African words, or vice versa? And so now we're going to get into the issue of method, right? And so hold on one sec. Here we go. I pulled my phone out, so I'm seeing some of the latter comments, and I do see the troll. If there's a way to block love chat XYZ, that'll be good. But anyway, let me get back to the conversation. So now we're going to get into an issue of method. So remember that it is Cambone's. Anytime you hear anybody in a discussion of ancient Egyptian, that comparing ancient Egyptian with modern African languages, and that you got to reconstruct ancient Egyptian first, that the sole person that argument comes from is Obadeli Cambone. And when you ask him for proof of this method and acceptance of this method, he's always going to change the subject, or he's going to find a way that he has to go somewhere. He has something to do. He did this when I asked him. He did the same thing when Mboli asked him at a recent conference, because there is no such strategies which is accepted in amongst linguists around the world. Otherwise, he'd be quick to show you and provide text. And you know that. So I asked for 5 texts. Give me 5 texts that argues that method, um, that process of internal reconstruction before you can do comparisons with modern African languages. So here we go. So the issue of method. So this whole argument, this whole conversation is about method. So when I ask him, Cambone, and any of his parrots who don't know how to do linguistics, can you provide me source material for that argument and success, or anything that Cambone has written in terms of Reconstruction that is accepted by the linguistic community, world community, and they have utilized his methods in their own work when trying to do comparative work with languages that are dead and we only have the graphical representations of it. And of course, they're not going to be able to give you no source, but we have plenty of source material that argues the exact opposite. So here's one text here. It's an article entitled Internal Reconstruction and Context, in a text called Historical Linguistics 2, Theory and Description of Phonology. And I'm making sure that the next text that I'm citing, they're all texts dealing with historical comparative linguistics and research methods. Um, right? So he says the division between internal reconstruction and the so called comparative method has certainly been overstressed. In particular, there is no good reason to insist that the former must, in execution, precede in the application of the latter. In other words, there's nothing in historical comparative linguistics that requires you to do any kind of internal reconstruction before you can start doing comparative work. That is just nonsense. All right. So we go to the next source. This is Lyle Campbell, Historical Linguistics and Introduction. So this is another book teaching you how to do historical comparative linguistics. I've recommended this text, for a number of years, and this is the 3rd edition. So here we go. So he says, sometimes it is suggested that internal reconstruction should be undertaken first and the comparative method applied afterwards. In this view, internal reconstruction would help us to see beyond the effects of many recent changes so that we would have access to an earlier stage of the language for use in the comparative method when sister languages are compared with one another. This is often the case. Usually, both internal reconstruction and the comparative method lead in the same direction. However, in reality, there is no rigid principle about which method is to be applied first. They can be applied in either order. Often, reconstruction by the comparative method reveals alternations which the proto-language underwent, and it is perfectly legitimate to apply internal reconstruction to these proto-alternations. In order to reach even further back in time, to a pre-proto language. In this event, the sequence would be the comparative method first, followed by internal reconstruction, or perhaps first internal reconstruction to the individual languages, then the comparative method to related languages, and then internal reconstruction again to the reconstructed proto-language. In any event, it is important to check when internal reconstruction is applied before the comparative method, that it does not factor out alternations which were present in the proto-language. So again, here's a second source that is telling you that there is no rules, there's no logical reason to do internal reconstructions first before applying the comparative method. It's just hogwash. And when people make this argument, tell them to source up. So here's another source. So this is how many sources is that? So 1, 2, 3. So we're on a third source on this question here. So this is the Continuum Companion to Historical Linguistics, and it's an edited work. So there's an article, a chapter titled Internal Reconstruction, just like the last one, by Brian D. Joseph. And he says, for all the fact that internal reconstruction has been shown to be a powerful means of shedding light on the prehistory of linguistic states, might otherwise not be amenable to any further historical speculation. It has its limitations as a method. And so if you do internal reconstruction, it doesn't mean that it will tell you anything beyond the language itself. And so that's why in the other two source materials, it talks about there's no order. They're both valuable and they both serve a different purpose. But to require internal first before being able to do any kind of other comparative, or to have any other comparative conversation is just asinine. And so he continues. Now, this is one of the slides where I'm just going to ask you to pause if you're reviewing it, in terms of the archive, because I'm just going to read the latter part. But you'll see, if you can understand the nature of the comparisons that is being made beforehand. So this is just an example of what he's talking about from the previous page, right? And so, but he concludes, and this is what I have in the red. There is no evidence for a prehistoric stage of Greek with a nominative onomat, even though that is the form that the internal reconstruction would lead one to. What he's alluding to in this section here is that doing internal reconstructions can often give you false information beyond the language itself. So you would be expecting something, but it may not be a reality as evidence from the other reconstructions. And so to rely strictly on the internal reconstructions to make arguments and hypotheses about something else will often lead you astray. And so you have to be careful and understand the limitations of internal reconstruction. And so we now go to our fourth source. And so this is the PhD dissertation titled System Proto-Indo-European, the Primary Phoneme Inventory and Sound Law System for Proto-Indo-European. And so, this was published in 2013. And he says, from the comparative point of view, the method does not, in talking about the comparative method does not prioritize, here we have another linguist that does not prioritize internal or external reconstruction, but treats them as two axes by means of which a single coordinate, the reconstruction, is postulated. In this sense, the occasionally emotional discussion, he almost kind of predicted this conversation because people be in their feelings and emotional when they respond. The occasional emotional discussion concerning the demarcation line between internal and external reconstructions is a costly diversion of our resources. The comparative method gives no priority for internal or external comparisons, but seeks an arrangement of the material that results in simultaneously true internal and external propositions in a sound and complete, therefore valid reconstruction. So again, this is our fourth source here that makes that argument. And so here is another source here. So this is a comparative Semitic linguistics, a manual by Dr. Patrick R. Bennett. So uh, this is very important because again, this is another textbook which is teaching you how to do historical comparative linguistics. And this particular text is important for the simple fact that the Semitic languages have a number of languages which we only know exist because they left written records but are no longer spoken. In other words, there's a number of dead languages in the Semitic language group. And so this is a perfect test for that internal versus external uh, logic in terms of what should be done first. And again, we'll see that it is very consistent in terms of the argumentation. Alrighty. So this one I'm gonna read the whole page because and then of course you can come back and read this on your own. So Dr. Bennett says for most of the ancient Semitic languages, our phonetic knowledge is based on extrapolation from the modern or the better known ancient languages on transcriptions in other languages, for example, Punic and Latin based transcription and Plotinus's play, Polnilus, Ugaritic, etc. I'll just skip that. Or internal evidence from morphophonemic changes, alternations in spelling, or changes over time. The original scripts, other than cuneiform, are generally reliable for representing phonemic consonant contrast. And you have to have a good knowledge on the difference between a phoneme and a phone and phonemic theory, right? So uh, phonemic consonant contrast, because you can't the what distinguishes phonemes is the contrast between the so-called allophones and other sounds, right? Because each phoneme is really a range of sounds, and so we can get into more of that later. But vowels are often not represented at all. Vowel quality and quantity may be marked with diacritics, or primarily long vowels with matrices lectionis, consonant symbols conventionally used for vowel marking. Usually, this marking to mark the long A, the semivowels, Y and W for E and U, respectively. Consonant length may be marked with diacritic, like the Arabic shadat or the Hebrew degesh. It is never marked in indigenous Semitic scripts by doubling the consonant symbol. Indication of stress placement is rare. So, so here's the meat of the conversation here, but it had to be put into the context. So he's recognizing that the Semitic languages, in terms of our knowledge of the phonetic inventory, is based on extrapolation from the modern or better known ancient languages. So we come down, we skip. He says, fortunately for our purposes, this lack of phonetic detail is not an insuperable problem. Indeed, in some cases, like the retention of archaic consonantal spellings in Hebrew and Syriac, it may help us. Even without being able to specify the pronunciation of a given consonant in, say, Ugaritic, we can determine that it corresponds to a particular Proto Semitic unit, since it occurs in corresponding positions in related words. Such a sound is said to be a reflex of the unit in the proto language. Reflexes will normally retain features of the earlier unit they reflect. Thus, the Arabic F, which is a reflex of Proto Semitic P, reconstructed items assumed to belong to the proto language are marked with the asterisk, retains the voicelessness and labial articulation of P. In some cases, we can draw fairly detailed conclusions regarding probable pronunciation, right? So, what he's saying here is that just because, we don't know exactly what the sounds are, that's not a problem, because regardless, whatever is marked by the grapheme of the in the original script it is going to correspond with a series of sounds in the compared words. And so it the articulation of that particular sound is going to be within the matrix of the proto sound, right? And it's going to make sense, once we do the comparative data in combination with any kind of internal work that we've done, right? And so you can see from the pages here that what they're using is the standard. Matter of fact, they're using the conventional scripts and things when doing the comparison, and very few IPA, right? What matters is that it is a logical system. And this is what people got to understand about linguistics. It is not science. You can't go back in time and record any of the ancient speaking people. Everything that we know is going to be biological deductive reasoning. And, when we talk about mathematics, I always like to quote Dr. Eugenia Ching, a pure mathematician, especially, her area of focus is mainly in category theory and just the logic of math, the science of math, right? And, in her book, How to Bake Pie, on page 10, she notes, in math, the technique we use is logic. We only want to use sheer logical reasoning, not experiments. Again, you can't do experiments on ancient languages, right? Um, Not physical evidence, not blind faith or hope or democracy or violence, just logic. So, what are the things we study? We study anything that obeys the rules of logic. Mathematics is the study of anything that obeys the rules of logic using the rules of logic. And all of this is going to make sense in, as we progress along in these next few slides. And I have to keep stressing this. There's no amount of evidence, there's no amount of experimentation that you can do, because you have to have living uh, either people or artifacts or something that can give you. And they had no recording devices, they had no MP3 players back in the day in ancient Egyptian times where you can hear anything and use our spectrographs to analyze the language. It's not going to happen. So you have to use deductive reasoning. You have to use logic, right? And as me being a computer scientist, that's all we deal with is math. And I have to remind people that mathematics ultimately is a formal language. There essentially two types of languages outside of sign language, right? Uh, you have a formal language, and then you have a natural language. So a natural language are the languages that human beings speak on a regular, that kind of changes over time in that fashion. A formal language is languages that uh, like mathematics is a formal language. You have signs and symbols that represent things. You can pronounce them, or what I deal with as a formal language in terms of software, uh, languages. So my first training in linguistics is in software development in formal languages and mathematics, right? And this is why you find a lot of people in computer science into linguistics, especially if we're developing any kind of software that does any kind of translation work or speech recognition, right? You find a lot of people in computer science and in language and linguistics. But mathematics ultimately is a formal language that allows us to articulate the relationship between symbols and their ability to aid in the creation of models that allow us to better reason about reality. We create symbols, And then we examine the patterns and the relationship between the symbols. And then we use that information to create models that help us to reason about reality. Right. And so, in mathematics, you may be introduced to things like relations and functions. And, on the left-hand side, we're talking about a relation is a rule that relates values from a set of values called the domain to a second set of values called the range. So you heard of the domain and the range, either in graph form when you're talking about the X and Y axes, or when you're looking at sets, right? And then, we also have functions. A function is a relation where each element in the domain is related to only one value in the range by some rule. This will rarely happen in linguistics that you'll get a true function, right? But here are, four models of different types of relations between sets. So you have these ovals and you have these letters inside that just represent values, right? And then just different ways in which the domain, which is on the left hand side, is mapped to a value in the range, which is on the right hand side. So in some cases, like with this variation here, you have A maps to P directly, or in this case, we have B and C that both map to Q, right? So this is a one-to-one relationship. This is a two-to-one relationship, right? And then you have these more complex relationships. So these are just models to articulate what is exactly happening. Most of your linguistic, if we're talking about full sets of languages, is going to look more like C, right? Where you have, two or one-to-one correspondence, and then you may have a two-to-one correspondence. And in this particular case, this may indicate that there was a split, in language A, that there was either a split here, or it may be an example where these two examples coalesced into one, or merged, or it could be the other way around, where this one became two in language, A, and it may turn out that language B is older, right? So, and then there's just some that don't map at all in either set. So this is more realistic when it comes to historical comparative linguistics in terms of the sets. So, you know, one thing that Dr. Issa didn't understand is that the issue of chance lookalikes. So y'all seen me present this slide a number of times. So one more time isn't going to hurt you, but we have these two examples here of the English word mess, which is defined as a dirty or untidy state of things or a place, or this Kachiko, which is a Mayan language. They have a word mess, which means mess, disorder, or garbage. So at first glance, these two terms look like they may be related. But when we do a comparative set, we don't notice any patterns here, right, between English and Kachiko. So where we have English man, we're doing a first consonant test. There's the same word for man is atsi in Kachiko, or mouse is choi or choi, right? And moon, kata, right? Mother, not like none of these match. There's no pattern here. And in science and mathematics, we're looking for patterns so that we can create formulas, which are models that describes the rule for their relation. And so here, there's no relation for which we can develop a mathematical formula to describe that relationship and how to make predictions for any kind of similar data that may come our way in the future, right? And so one thing you have to understand about like the transliteration system, it means transliterate. It means it's taking one writing system and transferring it over to another. This is something that Cambone seems to not really understand, right? And so, people ask like, how can you not how can you use a transliteration system and map it to sounds in the modern language? That's easy because they're all symbols. We're not dealing with actual sounds. So remember what I said at the beginning of our conversation, that even if you take the IPA, they're all idealized. These symbols represent an ideal. They do not represent absolute values. And so, like, if we was to try to solve this logic puzzle, how can we take a shape and equate it to a number? How can circle plus triangle equal 8? How can circle minus triangle equal 4? How does a square plus a star equal 12? That doesn't make any sense. But this is a logic puzzle. This is a mathematical. And so when we go back to the definition, what is mathematics? Is the study of anything that obeys the rules of logic using the rules of logic, right? So this is a logical puzzle. These are just representation. These are just signs and symbols that can be replaced of anything. And I'll leave this up to you to solve the puzzle. And I'll give you the answer. The answer is 4. But how did we get to 4? Right? And what is the value of the star, and what is the value of the square? So, and matter of fact, what is the value? What is all these values? All right. And so we could do the same thing here. How does a picture of 2 watermelon slices have a numeric value, right? And how does 3 pictures in sequence in addition equal 36? It's a logical puzzle. I'm doing some very basic ones so that y'all can kind of follow what is going on here. So we have 3 sets of watermelon slices, or 2 watermelon slices, and that equals 36. So you can just divide 36 by 3. That'll be 12. So we know that, when we see this symbol, the value of it is 12. And so we can, in this next row, we have 12 plus peach equals 28. Well, you just subtract 12 from 28, and that leaves you with what? 16. So we know 16 divided by 2 is 8. So we know the value of each peach is 8. So we have 12 plus 8 plus 8 equals 28. All right. And then we have here, so we know that the peach is 8 minus the banana. We don't know what the value is of the banana, but we know that what the peach minus banana equals 3. So now the banana must have a value of 5. But a banana, is not a number. A picture of a peach is not a number. 2 watermelon slices is not a number, but we transliterate. That's what we do. And so anyone saying that you can't substitute a watermelon for a number value and solve this equation is foolish. They don't understand mathematics. They don't understand logic. Right? And so this is what I mean here. So this is just a graph. So only in the modern age are sounds able to be recorded and analyzed and studied scientifically. You need actual sounds and graphs to do that. The IPA is really made for the modern age under, scientific instruments. So this is a spectrograph illustrating voice and breathy voice velar stops as produced by a female speaker of the Owerri dialect of Igbo in Nigeria, right? I highly recommend this book, for those of you who have gotten the basics on language and want to, delve into phonology, the sounds of the world's languages, right? And so, what we're going to do is an exercise regarding, comparison with ancient Egyptian and the Yoruba language. And so, these graphemes on the left are going to be transliterated to these graphemes on the right, which are numbers. And so I won't go through all of these. You can just pause this when you review the video. And we're going to go to this table right here. So, in my normal fashion, we have Chikam, which means Egyptian, and then we have the Yoruba language, and then we have the correspondences on the right hand here, right? So we have just numbers. So I'm comparing words from the ancient Egyptian to Yoruba. I've replaced all the so-called sound graphemes with numbers. I've transliterated the graphemes and sounds to numbers. Does this prevent us from doing a comparison between ancient Egyptian and the Yoruba language? I'm going to, pause it a little bit and see if y'all can find the patterns. I've helped you out a little bit with the colors. So, you can see that there's a pattern here that I have in the red with the number 24, right? So in Ichikam, we can see that there's a 12, 24, 12, 24, 12, 24. But then we get here, we have 24, 16, 24, 16, 24, 16. Here is 24, 17 that is bolded. So what is this telling you here? But notice that we have the same 24 and 17 correspondence over here. There's a pattern here. But notice that it's 17 that's bolded in blue all the way down, but the 17 stops here, and then 16 takes over here. So what do you think is going on? And I'm gonna look in the comment section and see if y'all can get it. Right? I'm not expecting y'all to be able to pronounce any, Yoruba and ancient Egyptian words here. I'm just looking for if y'all understand the nature of patterns and what we look for in terms of patterns, right? And what does the bolded 24 and 17 sequence and then 24 and 16 sequence here tell us in the Egyptian that is going on over here in the Yoruba, right? And I know there's a time delay, so I'm gonna give it a few seconds. All right. Phonetic mutation. I don't know if you can consider this phonetic mutation. Says the numbers represent, alphabets of sound. Yes, remember that when we're comparing. Remember when my definition of mathematics, it's the relationship between symbols. And so I can replace every single one of these numbers with a picture of fruit, and it would still show the same patterns, right? With the same values and meanings. Right. So just to kind of move the conversation along, I'm gonna go to the next slide. And so remember when I said that most likely you would see it in here, the C representation. And in our previous example, it is more so like A. So we see that there's an A to P direct one-to-one correspondence, but we see a BC split, with the same correspondence in Q over here, right? In this particular set. So, here are the words that we would normally transliterate. And I made sure that it was simple, that it wasn't any, foreign IPA, symbols that, was not normally available. So remember that ancient Egyptian doesn't have vowels, right? So you can see that the 24, is equal to T, and that the 17 is equal to N, which you see represented mostly in Yoruba, and of course in the three examples in Chicam, but that 16 represented the M sound, right? And we know it is M based upon internal evidence as well as foreign transcriptions of these names. That is very consistent between various different languages that was transcribed in ancient Egyptian words, right? So, and Talk Freak 11 says mathematics is literally symbolic logic. Any system sufficient enough to compute piano arithmetic will be incomplete so long as it is consistent. That's all that matters. And see, that's the fundamental thing. It's the consistency. This is what logic is. You have a premise and it has a particular value, and then it is from consistent. And does the conclusion proceed from the premises? That's what logic deals with, right? And so, this is just to give you an example of how, for example, we can take Egyptian and Yoruba comparison. There's no need for me to internally reconstruct the language of ancient Egyptian before I compare it with Yoruba, because there's going to be consistent patterns when I'm doing my comparisons. And so it's the same thing even if I do it with Proto-Bantu, right? And people will say that you can't use Proto-Bantu in the comparisons. Again, these are people who are not mathematically or scientifically literate. Because all that matters is the patterns. That's it. And what I have here is the mathematical model and formula, in the form, if A, then B. So if A, Proto-Bantu BD consonant sequence, therefore Middle Egyptian BN consonant sequence. It's consistent, right? And we can make predictions. So we ask the question, what is the prediction for Proto-Bantu bad, meaning to shine? Based upon the patterns that we see here, where we see BN consonant sequence in ancient Egyptian, we would expect to see in Middle Egyptian a BN correspondence for the word to shine. And that's exactly what we see in ancient Egyptian. So where it's about patterns, it's about consistency in the patterns and the correspondences. So we notice that I have a prefix here, W, right? And so, can we find that consistently between Bantu and ancient Egyptian? We sure can. So let's do another example. So we have, for example, in Egyptian, the verb prefix to rise, wabin. Then we have in Chiluba, mubandu, ascend, mount, to rise. This is just one example, but we can even make a prediction from here that, if this is a sound correspondence, then wherever there's an ancient Egyptian W, we would have an M consonant correspondence and probably a mu prefix, right? And so this is exactly what we see. Even in these words, we're not, worried about the roots here. And believe me, all of the sound correspondences for the words in red correspond. But that's not my focus here. It's the prefix in ancient Egyptian. So if A then B is the mathematical model, the mathematical formula we use to describe the relationship between these symbols, the ancient Egyptian W and Chiluba Mu, right? Everything is solid. And this is exactly what we do. So for those who want to understand the recovery methods of Egyptian phonemes, first we look at the transcription of Egyptian words and other ancient writing systems, as I mentioned earlier. We look at the transcription of foreign words in the hieroglyphic and hieratic script. We look into the Coptic tradition. We look at etymological evidence, phonotactic regularities, typological considerations on naturalness, synchronic variation in written forms, diachronic variation in written forms, rhymes and puns in the language, and then the consonantal phonemes of the Old Egyptian and pre-Old Egyptian. So there's a whole process that we go through, and all of this was done in Mboli's work, and this is the standard. And so, I took what was from what they did in the Semitic languages and applied it to the ancient Egyptian, which does not require you to internally reconstruct, which you can't do any damn way, because you can't distinguish what is a natural ancient Egyptian word versus what is a local loan into the language, because they have yet to identify closely related language to ancient Egyptian that you can do any kind of comparisons with to see what is inherited and what is a loan. But that's another conversation here. So that is the end of the presentation. And so now I will go to, well, let's see, there's 179 comments. So of course, I am not going to read all of that. So I'll just look at a few of these comments. And if you have any questions, I will take them now in the comment section. So let me see what's going on. Let me first check Facebook to see if there's any questions or comments there. I don't see that on the Harold Johnson page. So now I'm going to go to asarimhotep. Don't see. I'm going to refresh. Because this. All right. And it didn't show up on the page. I don't understand what is going on Facebook, but we'll deal with you later. So let me see. I'm randomly just picking stuff. I'm always associating numbers with letters, reading and interpreting, gang, graffiti, and written codes, etc. The Potter says, be serious. Ancient Egyptians did not have vowels. Coptic has vowels. Hebrew has vowels. Hebrew did not have vowels at first. Hebrew script with vowels is a modern thing. Kermit, I assume he means Kemet, did not write vowels. Not the same thing. Ujama says, this journey goes over his heads because of the level of detail and unfamiliarity. So I suggest that everyone pay attention and save questions and comments for later. Chow says, oh, that must be a pseudo correspondence according to Tack Freak. Arabic has sound symbolism. Y'all having your own debate in the chat. It looks like consistency is a weak value. You don't know which part is wrong. No, consistency. I would have to see, what exactly he's responding to. In linguistic, sound symbolism is a resemblance between sound and meaning. It is a form of linguistic iconicity. For example, the English word ding may sound similar to the actual sound of a bell. And I guess you're speaking about onomatopoeias, but there's no necessary correlation between the sound of the word and its meaning, only in the exception of onomatopoeia, uh, which are in contrast to the number of words in a language is rare. Uh, They say some African languages will have displayed something like ablat in Germanic or root patterns in Arabic. Yoruba has ablat as well, and many of the old words do. Um, uh, let's see. When you showed Yoruba and Egyptian and see the pattern, does it mean they both come from the same parents? Like if I was just using that example, which I displayed on the screen, no, we would have to do more. But when you do correspondences and you're seeing hundreds of them and dozens of them, like there you want to do enough to where chance cannot be the argument for the correspondences that we see. So the what we're looking for to eliminate is chance lookalikes, right? That it's a coincidence that these things correspond. So if you're seeing patterns like this consistently and you can make predictions regarding the phonemes, and you can do just like what I did with the Chiluba or the Bantu and ancient Egyptian. So where we're doing not only basic vocabulary, but we're also doing grammar. And so when you combine those, we've eliminated that these correspondences are the result of chance, and therefore the only logical conclusion is that uh, these two or more languages share the same non uh, or the pre-dialectical parent. Right? The non-accidental correspondences help us to determine that the parent language both of these languages descended from. So it's excellent work, Asante. We need more people to attend conferences like you have people that trying to teach people that said topics. Really appreciate you. Why is it so difficult to decipher the ancient Nubian language? Because there, to our knowledge, there just isn't any closely related language for which we can, you know, keep in mind that the Nubian, the Meroitic script that for which you're referring to, the script has been deciphered, and we're able to tell certain words and even certain grammar features. However, because there's no closely related surviving living language, they haven't been able to uh, put meaning behind much of the words because we don't know what the words are and what language that it belongs to, right? And so, as a result of the Arab invasions into the area and the spread of Islam, many different African languages in the Sudan have been replaced by Arabic. And so you have groups there, Nubian groups, who still have their Nubian identity, but they don't speak their ancient language, and none of it survives. So that's why we haven't been able to decipher it. So luckily, for example, for ancient Egyptian, you had Coptic, which was still being as a liturgical language spoken, and you were able to. There was another, series of Greek texts for which there was one-to-one correspondences between the meanings of the words and the like. So you had the Coptic language, and then you had, for example, the Greek language for which they were translating, the words into the Greek language. and that's what helped with the ancient Egyptian decipherment. But you have no such thing for neurotic. Sounds like you have a post hoc scheme to map ancient Egyptian to Yoruba, but no overarching schema to map it to the Niger Congo A or Niger Congo B language fiber, indicating you are begging the question. Well, Tac Freak 11, there's no such thing as Niger Congo A or Niger Congo B. If you can find me a text where Niger Congo has been deciphered, Niger Congo has been proved as a language phyla based on the comparative method, which establishes family relationships, I will give you my podcast. I won't do a podcast ever again. And so, you're already in the wrong part of the argument because Niger Congo doesn't exist. And it's it is pseudoscience to talk about Niger Congo, Afro-Asiatic, Nilo-Saharan, or Khoisan. Unscientific language categories. But we've had plenty of shows on that. And, sources for days. So you're just going to have to meditate and get in tune with up-to-date scholarship. Let's see. When you show the Urin Egyptian and see the pattern, doesn't mean it will come. I answered that. In Kemet's history, was there ever a difference in what language the royalty spoke and the common people? That's kind of hard to argue because there's many different hypotheses out there regarding the nature of the language. There's individuals like myself and Mboli who argue that there were different languages spoken, and there are other linguists and Egyptologists who have argued that as well, that there was just different languages spoken along the Nile, and that and there's some who have raised that there's like the priestly language, like this is a language of royalty, while the people, for example, spoke Coptic. And you might even find that in Karsten Pugh's book on the phonology of a dead language. He has a similar hypothesis along those lines. I'm not in agreement with that, but it's just really hard to say. There's just some things we just have to work out. Says onomatopoeia refers to words that imitate sounds. Some examples in English are bow wow or meow, which represent the sound of a dog or cat. Yeah, we know that. Would the move from ancient Nubia to the founding of Kemet, would it be similar to the movement of Europeans to the founding of Americas? In many respects, yes. In many respects, yes. Let's see. So is Cambone arguing that the NDC is erroneous? Does he provide examples? Isn't he a historical comparative linguist that uses TWI? He's not necessarily a historical comparative linguist. And what he's saying is fundamentally true in terms of that you have the hieroglyphic script. So this is one thing you got to understand. You have the hieroglyphic script, and it has certain sound values depending on their monoliteral, biliteral, triliteral, right? And consonants, that is a primarily consonantal system, and they have certain consonantal values. And however, our keyboards, like you see here, it does not come with hieroglyph keys on it, right? So how are you going to represent the hieroglyphic script when we're trying to communicate with each other, regarding the ancient Egyptian language on a keyboard system that uses the Latin alphabet, right? So what they've come up with is the MDC is the manual decodage system, where we're just mapping, we're just translating. So just like how I translated the letters, transliterated the letters to the numbers, we're doing the same thing. So we're saying that the grapheme for the vulture glyph, we're going to represent that grapheme with the capital A on our keyboard. And the hieroglyph, that is the arm and hand, we're going to represent that glyph with a lowercase a, right? And so on and so on. So what Cambone is saying is what everyone knows, is that the transliteration system and the graphical system of the ancient Egyptian is not a one-to-one mapping in the phonological system that is actually spoken in language. And what we're saying is that, yes, that is true, but that does not prevent us from doing sound comparisons between ancient Egyptian and any kind of modern African language. Because what we do know is that those hieroglyphs represented sounds, and they may, fluctuate. It may represent an aleph. It may represent a phoneme system, meaning it could be 2 or 3 different sounds, and and where it is positioned in the word and in a sentence may uh, dictate how it is actually pronounced. But that doesn't hinder us, because all we know is that it is a value, and that it is consistent. So once we say that this is this, and we map it to words, corresponding words in modern African languages using the IPA or phonetic system. And when we see a consistent pattern, it tells us about the nature, about the articulation of the sounds that we find in ancient Egyptian. And we juxtapose that in comparison to how the Greeks wrote ancient Egyptian words, how the uh, people in Canaan wrote ancient Egyptian words, how the people of Sumer and Akkad, Akkad, and all of those folks wrote ancient Egyptian words, and how the Egyptians wrote words coming from those languages. All of that in conjunction tells us, it gives us information about how ancient Egyptian sounded, or what phonemes were present at a particular time in ancient Egyptian history. So it's not just one little thing. And so what Cambone has done is oversimplify the arguments, and it was clear when he made that statement that he didn't read uh Mboli's work at all. So let me continue. The same method conclusion that supports Egyptian and Bantu languages are from the same parents. Um, I'm not sure what did he ask. Let me see. Yes, essentially yes. Okay. What makes Proto-Indo-European be closer to China into than Sumerian, and how is it possible given the geographical proximity of Sumerian? Um, I'm assuming the Proto, i.e., means Proto-Indo-European, is closer to China into than Sumerian. Who made that argument? Yeah, you. I don't know who made that argument that you're talking about. There's a difference between sound symbolism and onomatopoeia. Okay, cool. You got smoke, Asahar. Always. He's not one to build off of Greenberg. Exactly. The languages are preserved still, and not the one for Merodic. Tell you that. Creek needs schooling on these Bantu connections. Indeed. Coptic and pockets of Berber are still spoken in Egypt, which is one of the most Arabized African countries. Indeed, but Cushitic, Merodic is not spoken in Sudan. So apples and oranges. Can't be schooled. No one doesn't exist. So, yes, warmest greetings, everybody. London is in the building. Peace and blessings, Brother Conan Lee. He says, late to the party, maybe not a loss because struggle with the linguistics, to be honest. Indeed. Says, you just answered your own question. It says, Rotobantu is actually being reconstructed, but okay. Actually, many vocabulary of Proto-Bantu has been reconstructed. The grammar has not. So you can't build off of what doesn't exist. Greenberg made groupings, not families. Exactly. Like to even have this discussion with Talk Freak 11, we would have to start from the beginning. So obviously he's not a follower of the channel. So he watched too many Timo Cypher's videos. Exactly. Yeah. Let me see. See, Niger Congo is a language grouping and a theoretical language family. The work isn't there for a family in context with no Niger Congo languages. And Mr. Trey Day says, can you please address Talk Freak? I hope I am. And thank you for the donation. I appreciate it greatly. Cheers, it's right for 42 tribes. Let's see. Napata says, my fervent wish is that you learn greater skepticism about modern Western scholarship and its consistency. It stands on really wet sand. You have to be more specific. Our Khoisan language is part of China into, not to my knowledge. I still don't get it though. I just accept or reject the arguments for why I came. Wasn't it the Hittites who called the Nasubitis Insabia? Uh, I think they pronounce it Insabia for Nesubiti. I need to come Insabiti. No, it's not Insabiti. There's no, that's not what they call it. It's like Insabia. Indeed, it sounds like all of them. Important as transliteration into the field of Ujima, there is no one standard scheme and use for hieroglyphic and hieratic text. Actually, it really kind of is, with the exception of like one or two graphemes. So, like for example, in the American and British system, they'll use I for the read leaf, while the German system will use the J transliteration. Right? Most everyone agrees and uses the same standard. That may have been true like in the time of Budge or something like that, but everyone is pretty much coalesced on a standard in modern times. So you can argue that there are some social challenges there, and these challenges. Nope. Says women still speak Cushitic. Okay. John Connor Bowley made the argument that pre-Proto-Indo-European is closer to English history compared to Sumerian in one of his videos on YouTube. That's possible. You would have to discuss with him that, and I'm saying that because I know for a fact that he is currently working on a book dealing with Indo-European and Semitic languages, and so that hasn't been released yet, and I'm not privy to all the details in the book. So if he makes in kind of recent videos a conversation where he makes that argument, I would have to see his argument for it. So the book that he's working on just hasn't been released just yet. So Amharic and the languages spoken by the Oromo, Ethiopian, and Somali are not related to Nubia. No, they're related to those languages, and I think Jean-Claude Mboli does a good job. He primarily uses Somali, but but the language is said to be related to those kind of in so-called Nilo-Saharan languages in Nubia. He shows the relationship between them all. This is why it's like when people say Nilo-Saharan and Niger Congo and you can't compare, it's just all hogwash. It's pseudoscience. And this is why everybody runs from actual debates when we have to when people have to defend Niger Congo and Afro-Asiatic. But I'm not seeing any more questions, And I think this is a good time to end the program. So I do appreciate each and every one of you for joining the conversation. And I'll let everyone know when we invite not in bowling, Okwame Osei and Dr. Jahi Issa and Dr. Salim Faraji to come on the program so they can discuss their book and the conversation or their response to Cambone himself. And so I can give him the link, but I would make up another show. So if you want to do another show, because I don't want to make this one too long, but we can continue the conversation on the next show. So I can start another show just for you to call in. So let me know. I'm waiting for the response in the chat. As a matter of fact, let me just pull up the presentation because we have these discussions. All right. And so what's going to happen is I'm going to end this show and I'm going to start another one. So just come to my, go to the asarimhotep YouTube page or this link, and then, because I would have to leave out of this program to start the next show. So here we, what is that? Okay, he says, he claims that Yoruba and Egyptian is a coincidence. Well, we can show and prove. I do this all day. And so again, we're going to start the show in probably like 5 minutes or so. So I'm going to, the next one's going to be the after show. All right. So, and I'll let multiple folks come on and I'm going to post the link into the chat. So I'm going to end this one. So this one, I don't like having them 12-hour long shows. So right now we're at about 1 hour and 47 minutes. So it's about to get on. And so we'll be back in just a few. All righty. Peace. Coming back.